Chapter 18. The Manhattan Theater, where Stars on Mars was playing, closed its doors suddenly. None of the newspapers knew why. Behind the doors, Davina Natel had been fired and the theater staff had been sworn to secrecy. Molly hypnotized every single person who was working on the show: the conductor in the orchestra, the musicians, the ticket people, the sellers, the light operators, the stagehands, the makeup artists, the other actors, and the boy who swept the stage. Everyone thought she was marvelous. The rehearsals began. They started at 10 each morning, with a brief break for lunch and more rehearsing all afternoon. Molly had to learn how to stand, how to dance, and what to sing and say. To Molly's surprise, she discovered that the rehearsals were really fun, and she was determined to try her hardest to be amazing. Of course, whatever she did, the rest of the cast thought she was amazing. When she sang out of tune, nobody noticed. When she got moves in the dance song, nobody cared. Her tap dancing was useless, but everybody thought it was amazingly perfect. Petula was enjoying it too. She didn't like the Martian monsters, which were enormous red peppers with antennae. But she loved the red astronaut outfit that had been tailor-made for her. She also enjoyed barking on the stage. Then, on her third day of the theater, came a meeting where Molly wasn't expecting. Molly was in her dressing room when she heard a horrible, screechy voice in the corridor shout, "Where is she?" "She's in there, Miss Davina," said a sequin chorus girl said. "But, Davina, don't be too angry. When you'll meet her, you'll see. You'll like her." "Like her?" yelled the voice furiously. "Like her? She just ruined my career. She's stolen what's mine. What's the matter with you? Rixie, Barry, all of you. You know I made this show what it is," the chorus girl squeaked. "Sorry, Davina, but when Davina stormed into Molly's dressing room, when Molly was trying on an astronaut outfit, Molly was ready. "So," said Davina, slamming the door behind her and stamping her high-heeled boots, "who do you think you are? How dare you?" Then her mouth plunged open. "Are you Molly Moon?" she said in disbelief. Molly looked at Davina, the singing, dancing prodigy, the starlet whose performances everybody loved to watch, and Molly was fascinated. For close up, Davina didn't look anything special. Without makeup, her face was pale and rather sickly looking. Her blonde hair was limp and greasy. Her eyes were bulgy and had gray rings underneath them. But you're so ordinary," said Davina, amazed. "So are you," said Molly, equally bewildered. "They said you were really, really special," said Davina, too dumbstruck to register Molly's remark. "How could someone as ordinary and as lumpy nosed as you take my part?" She was overwhelmed for a moment. Then, grinding her teeth, she took a step back towards Molly, and in a calm, charming voice she said, "That's my costume. I think you'd better give it back." Her eyes fixed on Molly's. Molly calmly looked back and suddenly noticed that the pupils on Davina Natel's eyes were huge. More than that, they were spiraling and dark, like swirling black whirlpools. Molly felt unsteady, as if the ground were starting to disappear. Quickly she concentrated and gave Davina a strong blast of her hypnotic eyes. But she was shocked to find, as she increased her voltage to glare to maximum power, that Davina's eyes had a strong pull. With every ounce of focus that she possessed, Molly stood firm until the ground felt balanced again under her feet. This was a big surprise. Davina Natel had the gift. She could sing and dance, but on top of this she had the gift. She had the gift without really knowing what it was. It wasn't as finely tuned as Molly's, but she obviously used this power over other people, so to influence them and charm them. Molly felt as if she almost wanted to make friends with Davina. She could train her and they could become partners. They'd be unbeatable. But these ideas went out of her head when she heard what Davina was saying. "You're so plain, so ugly. You're not a kind of girl anyone would like to watch on stage. So why don't you just give up? You're not made for stardom. You're too boring. You've got no charisma at all, and your dog is revolting." Petula whined. and Molly determinedly increased her eye beam again. But Davina's angry glare shot back. It was a tug of war between green and blue eyes. Molly's hands began to sweat. She was concentrating so hard on her look that she couldn't even begin to think how to use her voice. She began to worry that she wouldn't win. And as this negative thought clouded into her mind, she weakened. She wondered what would happen if Davina managed to hypnotize her. Maybe Davina would rob Molly of all her powers and leave her empty-handed. Molly imagined herself as a tramp on the New York streets, lost and confused, with a mind blinked by Davina. It was a future too horrid to contemplate, and it was so scary that it gave Molly a surge of energy. With a sizzling knockout stare that made her hair stand out from her head, the tension snapped, and Molly had won. Davina looked away. In a shaky voice, she said, I don't know how you've done it. You may have won everyone else over, but you won't win me. You're just a pimply, ugly country girl. Breaking down in loud sobs, Davina stumbled away. Molly was exhausted from the confrontation. She had never expected to meet someone who had the gift, and she was shocked at herself for not being prepared. She should have guessed that other people like her existed. Molly wondered how many people there were in New York who, like Davina, unconsciously used their hypnotic powers to get ahead. Then Molly wondered how many there were who had their powers and knew exactly what they were doing. She speculated on how many copies of the Logan book there might be. Maybe there were people who were even better at hypnotism than Molly. All these thoughts were very unsettling. She was relieved when a knock at the door distracted her and Rixie Bloomy poked her plastic-looking face into the changing room. She smiled sweetly. Are you ready to rehearse, dearest Molly? The night the New York Tribune was a shocking headline. That night, the New York Tribune had a shocking headline. Broadway Brawl. Davina Natel makes way for a new kid on the block. Professor Knockman bought his copy of the paper and read it eagerly on the street counter. So she was called Molly Moon, and she was starring in a Broadway musical. Fantastic! At last there would be no more hunting in the dark. Such a bright spotlight shone on this Molly Moon, he couldn't possibly lose her again. This was brilliant! Professor Knockman couldn't wait to meet her. It didn't take Knockman long to discover that Molly Moon was living it up at the Waldorf. He parked his rusty white van on the other side of the street from the hotel. All night he waited, huddled up in his sheepskin coat, trying to warm himself with a small heater plugged into the cigarette lighter socket, chewing on his long nails to bits as he waited to spot his prey. He slept fitfully, obsessively checking the hotel entrance. Around 9:30 in the morning, a silver Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the hotel. Knockman shook himself awake and wiped his steamed-up windows to get a better look. A porter was opening the hotel door for someone. Knockman squinted, and at last he saw Molly Moon. Down the steps towards her car she came. She was dressed in a soft white mink coat with a fur cap to match, and her feet were in cream-colored, knee-length, low-heeled leather boots. Under her arm was a flat-faced pug. The girl looked like a starlet, altogether different from the scruffy kid Knockman had seen in Blyersville. Knockman was beginning to respect Molly. He was amazed and impressed by the speed at which she'd arrived. She had exceptional talents, and he was sure he was the only one in New York who knew her secret. From that morning on, Professor Knockman kept close track of Molly's movements about town. He followed her as she went shopping, accompanied by bodyguards, watching as more and more smart boxes were loaded up into her Rolls-Royce. He waited as she went into amusement arcades and spent a fortune. He sat outside fabulous restaurants as she tasted the cuisines of the world with Pixie and Barry. The more he watched her, the more convinced he was that he was right about the power of hypnotism. This Molly Moon obviously had everyone under her thumb. Knockman had been looking forward to years for learning hypnotism himself. Ever since he'd learned about the hypnotism book from a rich old lady he'd met in a coffee shop. he found out that the 90-year-old woman was related to Dr. Logan, the great hypnotist, and what was more, she'd inherited his money. In her grand apartment, she'd showed Knockman an intriguing letter from the librarian at Briarsville describing the hypnotism book. Why, if that book ever got into the wrong hands, who knows what might happen to the world? Knockman instantly hoped those wrong hands might be his. He became convinced that if he could get his hands on the book, he would be able to carry out one of the most ambitious crimes ever. For Knockman was no intellectual with a studious interest in a book. He wasn't a real professor, but a professional crook with a lot of experience under his belt. Knockman had hours to while away in his new van, hours to mull over how pleased he was that all his efforts had been worthwhile. In a way, Molly Moon finding the book had been a good thing, because now, once he got his hands on her, he could very quickly rocket himself into the Super League of Crime. Knockman licked his lips greedily. He knew now that he was going to become the greatest criminal of all time. As he dozed off in his van, he imagined how much money Molly Moon must be making, and he murmured to himself approvingly. He flitted in and out of sleep, fantasizing that he too had hypnotic powers, dreaming of how powerful he could become. He had visions of himself in an old-fashioned golfing clothes, and a lawn beside a huge mansion with a maid bringing him tea. He saw himself on a grand yacht with a uniformed crew of 10 sailing around New York. He imagined himself sleeping on a pile of money holding the book Hypnotism. One day at dawn, Knockman woke to see a huge poster being pasted up on the side of the skyscraper near the Waldorf. The picture on it was a giant photograph of 100-foot tall Molly Moon in an astronaut outfit holding her dog, who was also wearing a spacesuit. Knockman chuckled. This girl was a genius, and the better she was at hypnotism, the better it was for him. I called it. Molly is slowly more and more realizing that hypnotism is an evil, evil thing. She was like, the idea of her being hypnotized is so awful that it gave her the determination to overcome the hypnosis. Surely she must realize now that hypnotism is a horrible thing to inflict on someone. Like, my prediction for the book, I'm right so far. I don't know how Knockman is going to get. Ooh. What if Knockman somehow finds out about Rocky and blackmails Molly into helping him? Because that seems like the kind of thing he'd do. Threaten a kid to get another kid to commit crimes for him. Seems like what he'd do. Anyway, that's my prediction, and that is the end of this chapter.